Good morning, Grace Church. Good to see you here today on this first Sunday of Advent. And in case you don't know what that means, it simply means arrival. It's the time of the year that we look forward to the arrival of Jesus. And one of the ways that we're going to kind of count down the clock, if you will, is to light a candle each week on this Advent wreath. This was invented by a children's pastor in Germany, and he wanted to help the kids mark the time, but I don't know, I'm kind of like a big kid. I need something like this in my life too, and maybe you do too. Each candle represents something about Jesus, the gift that he gives to us in our life. And so this series, The Gift That Keeps on Giving, is going to be one of these ways that we can remember through lighting a candle each week to examine each gift. All right, so here's the first one. The first gift is the gift of hope. Everybody say hope. Hope, there you go. The first gift that we celebrate of Jesus' arrival on planet Earth is the gift of hope. And if you need hope in your life today, you've come to the right place and you've found the right Savior. The reason we light candles for this is because of a verse in the Gospel of John that tells us about who Jesus is and what he's going to do. So look with me at this verse that's on the screen. In fact, let's read it together. Here we go. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So we mark these weeks by remembering the light of Christ, the light of his hope that he gives to us. And for us to really understand hope, it seems to me today, we need to think of a time in our life where we were facing despair or hopelessness. We need to be thinking about that. Have you ever had a time in your life you were hopeless? What's your first memory of being hopeless? Mine happened when I was just like 5 years old, and it actually happened at Christmas. You see, during that time I had a favorite cartoon and a favorite show and comic book, and it was about the Lone Ranger. And here are the action figures that came out with the Lone Ranger and his buddy Tonto. And I saw these for the first time in my grandma's Sears and Roebuck catalog at her farmhouse in Owen County, Kentucky. And I thought, this is what I need. And so I remember telling everybody in the family that I was going to tell Santa Claus. We eventually made like the hour-and-a-half drive to the nearest paved part of Kentucky where I could find a mall. And I sat on Santa Claus's lap and I told him what I wanted. He assured me that Buddy the Elf and others that worked in the workshop would be building this toy for me. So I was very excited. So fast forward to Christmas morning. I got up, I went downstairs to my little brother, and ta-da, all of these presents were under the tree. I was like, woohoo, yes, it's happened. The cookies were gone, the milk was drank, and I was like, here we go. So I noticed there were several presents. I opened the first one, and it was Silver, the Lone Ranger's horse. I thought, all right, we're off to a good start, right? All right. Second present I opened, Tonto, his best friend, his companion. I was like, yes, we're on our way to getting the Lone Ranger action figure. The third thing I opened up was Scout, Tonto's horse. And that was it. Like there were no other presents under the tree. And I thought, what kind of Santa Claus brings all of the friends of the Lone Ranger but doesn't bring the Lone Ranger himself? I mean, I got a horse that nobody can even ride. I know this is wrong. Now, I've told you before, I'm a grateful Christian in recovery from anger. This started early in my life. And one of my major tantrums took place on Christmas morning. My family realized they have a problem on their hands because I made this announcement. Me thinks me don't like Santa Claus anymore. I'm done with Santa. I was finished with all of that. I spent the whole day in misery, my poor family. Well, I didn't know that my grandma Olds actually knew Santa. They were friends. I don't know how. I'm just telling you the news. And somehow they had arranged, my grandma really wanted to buy me the Lone Ranger action figure. And we were going to her house on Christmas night. So all day I was miserable, and I got to my grandma's house on Christmas night, and I opened up, and there was the Lone Ranger. At last, my problem was solved. But for 8 hours, I was hopeless. I was in despair. Have you ever been there? Well, there's a lot more times in life that life is far more serious than missing a child's toy. In fact, hopelessness in the dictionary even is one of the most depressing things you can read about. Hopelessness. Look at what Merriam-Webster dictionary says about this. It's having no expectation of good or success. Ugh. Not susceptible to remedy or cure. Well, this is terrible. It gets worse. Number 3, incapable of redemption or improvement. Hopeless. Despair. Have you ever been hopeless in your life? Chances are somebody is battling this even this morning within the sound of my voice. For somebody here today, maybe the hopelessness is best described through the word depression. Or maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's a recent trip to the doctor's office that was not good for you. Maybe it's grief. You know, the thing about loss is sometimes it leaves us lost. Maybe you're one of our middle school or high school students and you're struggling with your grades or you're struggling to get along with a teacher. What is it for you that's leaving you hopeless? I saw 2 more shootings in the past days. And many people are wondering, myself included, how long is this going to go on? How long are we going to keep doing this? Hopelessness. Now, can you name what's troubling you today? Can you go ahead, you don't have to say it out loud or anything, you're not going to share it with anybody, but just could you name it out loud to yourself? Can you picture it in your mind's eye? Go ahead and admit what it is. I tell you why this is important, because a lot of times I like to ignore these kind of things. Or I like to run faster or just say, well, everything's going to be fine. I just try to move on. And one of the things I'm discovering is that it's healthy to stop and just name it and recognize it. I'll share more about this in just a moment. But can you name what yours is? I want to invite you to just sit with that hopelessness and just have it there in front of you for a little bit this morning. You're safe. You're loved. And here's why this is important to do. Because when troubles rob us of hope, it threatens our soul, our very existence. And here's the good news. Jesus is the one and the only one I know who can give a hope that lasts. Jesus is the only one I know who can give hope, the Bible says, that will not disappoint us. I mean, we can find temporary hope. We're not talking about that today. We're talking about lasting hope. And it's important because we need hope to just survive. The Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, he ends it with, and these 3 things remain: faith, hope, and love. And no, it's not the top thing, but it's close. Hope is right up there in the top 3, right? One of my favorite authors is a guy named Lewis Smedes. He's a pastor, and he shares some of his sermons in his books, and here's what he wrote at the start of one of his messages. At the Los Angeles airport, there is a huge, brilliantly illuminated billboard that carries one simple message in 3 words: keep hope alive. Keeping hope alive is the #1 priority in the city of Los Angeles today. If hope dies, the city dies with it. But we all need to keep hope alive. Read the rest with me. Hope is to our spirits what oxygen is to our lungs. Your spirit dies when hope dies. See, this is why this is such a major issue. We need hope just the same way we need oxygen in our soul. Thankfully, the Bible has got some real honest stories, even around Christmas, of people who battled the darkness of despair and hopelessness, and how God's light could shine through and did shine through for them and will for us. And so we're going to take a look at a story just for a few minutes. Going to do a deep dive into the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth that's found at the very beginning of Luke's biography of Jesus. And at the very start of this story, we're introduced not only to this couple, but we're introduced to what's causing them so much pain in their life. So look with me at verses 6 and 7 of Luke chapter 1. Let's read it out loud together. Here we go. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all the Lord's commandments and regulations. they had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. All right, so we have two things here. The first thing we learn is they are righteous people. They're just outstanding folks. The second thing we learn, though, is some bad news, right? That they are troubled. They've got despair in their life. It's the one big thing that could be robbing them of happiness and joy in their life. What is it? It's being barren or childless. Couples that I know that wanted to have children and have not been able to, I've watched, and my heart's gone out to them as it leaves them not only with empty arms, but also with an emptiness in their very soul. Because that calling from God to have kids is serious, and we can imagine what they're going through, this couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth, because for decades they've wanted to have children. Now, this is a troubled thing if any time in history when a couple's not able to conceive and when they're not able to adopt and have kids. So this is bad at any point, but in the first century during this time and place, it even had some more nuances to it that made it even more difficult. Here they were. The first thing was couples needed to have children so that the children could care for them in their old age. There were no Social Security programs. There were no safety nets. There were no 401ks or anything like that. So all of that was summarized in one word: kids. Kids were supposed to take care of their parents. That's the way it worked in that economy in that time. But making matters worse, there was a religious stigma for those who are childless that was just awful. And I want to share with you what it is. I want to be clear. I do not believe any of this is true. I think this is stinking thinking and terrible theology, just to be bold and honest. See, the religious leaders of the day were trying to explain things that they couldn't explain. And this is before Jesus came along and taught them about who God was. This is before the New Testament. So I get it, but still, they answered the question, why bad things happen to good people, with simple cause and effect. Well, the reason is, the religious leaders would say, because somebody sinned and God's punishing you. And that was it. And a couple like Elizabeth and Zechariah, they were righteous, so it wasn't their sin, so whose was it? Well, it was somebody, the religious leaders would say. Somebody sinned, somebody in your family. Maybe it was your parents or his parents or her parents. Maybe it was your cousin Eddie. Somebody sinned. We don't know who. But that's why this is happening to you. Making matters worse, a Jew whose wife could not bear children was thought to be cut off from God. And even worse, Zechariah would have been expected to divorce his wife and remarry so he could bear children. Whew. Well, despite all this stuff, this couple is amazing because they stay devoted to God and they stay committed to one another. And they keep praying. They keep praying maybe for 40 or 50 years, and seemingly nothing happens. Now, when something happens that in my prayers, when I tell God exactly what I want and God does something like that, you know what I call that? A miracle. And when God doesn't do things exactly the way I want, I say, well, okay. Maybe it's an unanswered prayer, or, God knows best, and I'll say those kind of things. Well, in this story, we're going to see a miracle. But hang on, because it's not as nice and tidy as you might originally think. And we got to deal with this problem of unanswered prayer for just a moment. Because sometimes, here's the truth, God doesn't always answer my prayers the way I want him to. Is that true for you too? Yeah, so what do we do with that? What do we do with suffering? I've touched on it, so I don't want to leave you hanging. Well, the best summary I could come up with is this. Years ago, I met a pastor named Dr. Tony Campolo, and had the privilege of having a couple of meals with him and getting to know him just a little bit. And he told me about when he went and traveled to India and met with Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa in Calcutta, India, the great lover of the poor and the marginalized and the dying. And so he went to Mother Teresa and asked her this question: why does God allow all of this suffering? And Mother Teresa, standing near people who were dying, said to Dr. Campolo, I don't know, but when I get to heaven, he's got a lot of explaining to do. And Dr. Campolo said, well, that's probably why she lived to be so old, right? Because God didn't want to have that confrontation with Mother Teresa. Some things we're not going to find out until we get to heaven, okay? There'll be a long line at that booth that is entitled, Why? But in today's story, God acts in some ways that we can clearly see. Here's the first one. Zechariah was a priest at the temple, and a miracle takes place. To appreciate the miracle, you got to know that he wasn't the only priest there. In fact, there were hundreds of thousands of these priests, and they would be on duty certain times of the year, probably with 18 to 20,000 other priests. Now, they would go into the Holy of Holies and offer a sacrifice and burn incense and do prayers for the people. But to be chosen for this task required them to cast lots, and only 5 went at a time. So Zechariah spent his whole career and never got to do this. He always left disappointed until this day. Luke 1, 8 and 9, look with me what happens. One day, Zechariah was serving God in the temple, for his order was on duty that week. As was the custom of the priests, he was chosen by lot to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and burn incense. Wow. Okay. This would have been a moment he was dreaming of his whole life. You're kind of like, well, big deal, you know. Well, for him, it was a big deal. He got to go in and offer the prayers of the people. So imagine this with me in your mind's eye. He walks into the Holy of Holies, like picture the fanciest church you've ever seen, or fanciest building. He goes in there, and there's an animal sacrifice there on the altar, and there's all this smoke and incense burning, and the old priest outstretches his arms, and he begins to pray. He probably prayed, Lord, send the Messiah. They've been waiting and waiting and waiting for Jesus to come. But after he finishes praying, don't you think, because he's a human, that he also offered a prayer of his own or two? Wouldn't you? If he's in this place that they believe that the very presence of God was in, I'm sure he said, Lord, would you give us a baby? I'm back again, asking again. Would you give us a child? Now, imagine he opens his eyes, and standing before him is an angel. All right. Nobody fell over. Listen, if this was a movie, you had your popcorn, and this scene happened in front of you on the screen, you would drop your popcorn. You would fall over. You would be like, what? Yes, exactly right. Because an angel appears, and he's like, what? The angel's there with some news. And here it is. Luke 1:13. But the angel said, so Zechariah's terrified, of course. And the angel says, don't be afraid, Zechariah, for God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you are to name him John. Wow. The angel goes on to tell him his son's going to be a special kid, filled with the Holy Spirit from birth, sent on a mission to bring people back from God, the first true prophet in 400 years since Elijah. Whoa, big stuff. Now, if you were in this moment watching Zechariah, you would think that he would, what? Be grateful. Break out in praise. He would sing maybe to the angel, you keep hope alive, right? Like we just sang. Something like that. But that's not what happens. Here's what happens. Verse 18. Zechariah says to the angel, how can I be sure that this is going to happen? I'm an old man, and my wife is also well along in years. Notice he doesn't say she's old. He ain't stupid. So she's just well along in years. So you get what's happening? Instead of saying thanks to God, he's like, I don't know. Here's some reasons why this is not going to work, in case you're wondering. Now, why is he so pessimistic? What's wrong with this guy? He is a priest, after all. He's praying, and now God's answering his prayer. Why is he so pessimistic about it? I'm laughing because I totally get it, you know. And here's why I get it. Maybe you do too. See, the question is not only have we continued to pray about stuff in our life that's been around for a long time, that's difficult, that we need, and we're begging God to act. See, the question is not only are we keeping on praying, but do you believe that God can answer your prayer? Have you been praying it so long that it's just become kind of a doubt that you're frozen in. You know what I'm talking about? You ever have a relationship you think, forget it, they'll never change. They're hopeless. It's hopeless. Or a situation in your life that you've just written off. See, one of the reasons I love Christmas is because it calls us back to remember that God can do more than we could ever ask or imagine. Do you believe this? Are you willing to put your trust out there again and say, Lord, please answer my prayer? Evidently, the angel thinks that Zechariah needs a little time of quiet. Because the angel is going to respond, and it's not what you would expect. All right, now for full disclosure, we're going to look at 2 more verses. And the way that this sounds in my brain, I'll just tell it to you because, well, here it is I envision Gabriel to be from like The Godfather or The Sopranos. I think he's like Italian, all right? Like, because he's strong, he's powerful. He's one of those people that we see in the movies and on TV. And so Zechariah's like, this can't happen. I'm too old. My wife, she's well along in years. Look at me at verse 19. Then the angel says to him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God. He sent me to bring you the good news. But now, since you didn't believe what I said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born. And then with all the confidence in the world, Gabriel says, for my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Nobody would buy my audio Bible if I ever did one. It would be just wrong. But Gabriel, there's all this power, you know? And he's standing there, and Zechariah's like, I don't know. And he's like, Silencio, right? Stop talking. Stop talking. Who are you to question me? I don't know what all is going on. I kind of got a glimpse into what this might have been like for Zechariah. Last year, I got COVID, and I lost my voice. And I would see all these doctors, and they told me the only way I was going to get better was to stop talking. And that means also to stop preaching. And so all my colleagues here, they put me on the bench, and I wasn't allowed to preach so I could get well. And a couple things happened during that period of silence. The first is, unexplainably, my marriage got better. Probably just a coincidence. Probably had nothing to do with that. But anyway, that was the first thing. But the second thing that happened was that my prayer life went to a whole nother level. One day I was praying. I was with a team of people that was here. We were in Virginia at a conference on our knees. You remember? And the Lord said, Wes, you've been spending a lot of time preaching. I want to teach you now how to pray. I want to teach you to pray with the same joy and intensity and passion you preach. I want to just have some time with just you. And it was so sweet and so good. And God used that silence, you see, to grow my soul. Every opportunity, even difficulty, is a chance for us to grow spiritually. And that was the case in my life, and I wonder if it was the case in Zechariah's life, because he couldn't debate with God anymore. And maybe you've forgotten how great our God is. Maybe you've been putting up defenses and saying, well, Lord, you can't do that, even when he wants to. You know, he can do more than you can ever ask or imagine. That's how great our God is. After all, Zechariah and Elizabeth, they're getting ready to have a baby, even in their old age. And so the Lord is teaching Zechariah here what it looks like to wait in silent trust. Maybe that's a lesson for some of us here today, myself included. Well, if this was a Disney movie, right now we would be moving toward the end, and everything would be so cool. It would all get wrapped up in a neat little package, and they would all live what? Happily ever after. That's right. This is not a Disney movie. All right, so they're living in this darkness of hopelessness, but then they get the news that their baby, they're going to have a baby Zechariah and Elizabeth probably start thinking, cool, we're going to grow older, and this kid's going to care for us. We're going to get, grandkids, and we'll be cared for. But not only that, the stigma will be taken away. Nobody will talk to us about our lack of a kid or that we're weird or something like that. No, actually, that's not what happens in this story, because this isn't Disney. And Zechariah and Elizabeth's miracle, well, the miracle itself turns out to be weird. It's the best word I can give to it. It's just weird what happens next. Zechariah and Elizabeth, they're going to watch their son grow up, and he'll become John the Baptist. And while Jesus and the other kids are living with their family, and they're growing in wisdom and stature and favor before God and man, John is a little different. Look with me at verse 80 of Luke's account. Let's read out loud together. Here we go. John grew up and became strong in spirit, and he lived in the wilderness until he began his public ministry in Israel. Okay, he was strong, that's great, but he lives where? In the wilderness. He grows up in the wilderness, and not only that, he dresses in camel's hair clothing. That's right, you heard it right. Camel's hair clothing, and he eats locusts for dinner. This is in the Bible. If you don't believe me, there it is. So all of these wonderful things happen with John, but this is not the story that Zechariah and Elizabeth, I'm thinking, we're expecting. Because John is, well, he's weird. If he was growing up today, they would call in child experts to check on him, make sure he's okay, because he was so different. But he was bold, and so he preaches, he baptizes Jesus. But he also speaks out against King Herod, and he ends up getting beheaded. And so there that darkness appears one more time. And I have to wonder for Zechariah and Elizabeth, is this the miracle that they had been looking for? Well, the story of Christmas, if it teaches us anything, it teaches us that God often has a higher purpose for us than we can understand. That goes beyond the circumstances that I dictate that God must do in my life for me to find hope. And that's not it at all. See, Jesus comes to give us hope. Jesus as light is what gives us hope. And we can only hold on to or even discover that hope when we humble ourselves and have hands that are open to trust. To trust that God's ways are higher than our ways. To trust that God's doing more than we can even see in the moment. I've been having to live this in my own personal life. I want to share that with you for just a moment. Since the hurricane, Becky and I, my wife Becky and I were trying to recover from those 9 hours that we spent in our house as the storm came over. And we realized that left us with some trauma. But more than that, we had to move out of our house because the damage got so bad, the mold got so bad, that the last 8 weeks we've been bouncing around in rental homes and hotels. And that's really disrupted our life. Well, 10 days after the storm, Becky's big sister, Julie, called to let us know that their mother, Sarah, was in the hospital and she was not doing well. We hopped on a flight, the last one that left on that first day the airport was open. We went to Frankfort, Kentucky, and we sat at my mother-in-law's bedside for the next week, and she passed away. The following week, we had a week of not only mourning, but preparing for the celebration of life service, and we had that. And we came home, and 5 days later, I went to my cardiologist for what I thought was a routine checkup. For 27 years, I've had an artificial aortic heart valve that's kept me alive after aortic valve disease. And I'm feeling great, and I thought the test that I'd recently had, everything would probably turn out just fine. Well, I was shocked when my doctor said, we've got some concerning numbers on these tests. And I'm afraid that your heart valve is wearing out and you're going to need to have it replaced, which will involve open heart surgery. At this, I was reeling. I'm going to be going to Vanderbilt University Hospital on December 12th, and I'm just going to go there for a second opinion. They have a valve clinic there with teams of doctors that specialize in this. So I'm going to go there on the 12th. Lord willing, I'll be back on the 18th, and I'll be preaching again. I'll share with you an update. But I'd appreciate your prayers. So in my soul, I've been battling all this back to back to back to back trouble, and it's caused me to battle despair and hopelessness. I can almost feel Satan's breath on my neck, whispering lies about God and causing me to go into a dark, dark place. Some of you know what I'm talking about. But I've decided I'm going to do something different. Every opportunity, even trouble, is a time for spiritual growth. God didn't cause this trouble in my life, I don't believe, but God can use this trouble for his good. So I started sitting with my emotions, something new. I like to run away from my emotions. How about you? I decided not to try to fix anything. I can't fix any of this. And I decided to just be. And here's what I discovered, even in the midst of despair and anger knocking on my door and fear and worry. Here's what I found. I've never sat alone. The Lord has been with me. This is different for me, friends, and I'm here to testify. I'm going to give God glory. I'm going to shame Satan during this trouble that I'm going through, and I'm going to give God glory. What the devil meant for evil, God is using for good in my life, and I'm holding on to hope that he will continue to do that all the days of my life. And I'm holding on to that because what hope is not found in the set of circumstances that Wes has that have to get all the boxes checked for me to find hope again. No, here's where hope is found. Hope is found in the presence and promise of God. Would you say that with me? Hope is found in the presence and promise of God. If you're looking for hope today, you found the right place. You found the right Savior. Because hope is found when we recognize his presence, but also we hold on to his promise that his hold on us is true, and he will never let us go, and we will never face trouble alone. So one of the pillars of strength for me in these weeks has been my wife, Becky. She has been there to care for me, even in her own grief, but also to speak truth into my life when I'm worried. Last week, she brought me a song, and she said, you need to listen to this. It'll help you. God told me to share it with you. I said, yes, ma'am. And I started listening to this song by Maverick City and Kirk Franklin, and I started listening to it 10 times a day because it speaks truth that goes beyond our circumstances, and I just can't help but share it with you today. And since I am in Maverick City, I asked Pastor Casey to come. She's going to share this song with you, and I want to invite you to embrace it as your own because it is filled with the promises of God. That fear is not our future. Jesus is. Sickness is not our story. Jesus is. Heartbreak is not our home. Jesus is. And death is not our end. Jesus is. So I want you to just sit, just be with the Lord right now, and let these words bless you in Jesus' name.